Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 9th of August 2023. It's quite a lot to get through. There's all sorts of different information flying around, trying to work out exactly what's going on, particularly actually in this northeastern sector from Kupyansk through Svatova to Crimea. We go first of all to what Rebar say. That's the pro-Russian source, the military blogger Rebar. And I just wanted to highlight this. Despite the recent opening of the border crossing, the Ukrainians have launched an artillery strike at the village of Kolotilovka. This blatant provocation once again shows the attitude of the Kiev regime towards any peace initiatives. It just makes me want to punch Rebar in the face. I'm sorry about that, but it's like seeing someone run up to I don't know, an old lady on the street, try and grab a handbag, start punching her, and then the old lady starts defending herself, and then eventually the old lady punches the thug back, and the thug goes, "Well, that's not going to sort out peace initiatives, is it? You've just gone up and punched." Anyway, you get the point. It's just that kind of phrasing really makes me angry. Anyway, in the Kupyansk sector, Russian units continue to conduct a successful positional offensive. As a result, the fighting important positions were taken, the zone of control was expanded south of Vilshana and Pervomaisky. Now, this is referring to what Suryak Maps was talking about, and I've already reported this. Some big gains in this northeastern arc from sort of Liman Pershi here downwards. That is fairly significant. On my map, that is up here. And I haven't shown you my image. Just to remind you, if you don't know what my map means or the lines on my map mean, here is the legend. Please check it out. Pause the video and you can read that. Otherwise, I'm going to go back in. So here we are in that Kupyansk sector. We've got this this arc here where the Russians seem to have made a lot of gains. However, here there is talk about this area being on higher ground. The Ukrainians having the line of sight to those positions, and that allows them to hit them with artillery, but also tank fire, interestingly. And so the claim from Andrew Perpetua in a live stream last night that the Russians won't be able to hold these positions for long because their logistics supply lines are pretty terrible and they're just getting hammered by all sorts of different ordnance. I don't know. Who knows whether that's actually the case, but the Russians are certainly pushing in this northeastern area. Weirdly, I've seen a claim just now. I mean, this has come out just a couple of hours ago, saying that Ukraine have advanced in the forest northwest of Liman Pershi, and they've added zero 0.6 square kilometers to the liberated status. So if you can see there, that is just to the west of Liman Pershi. And that's all quite surprising. So possibly the Ukrainians are pushing back as they did down in the Kherson area. The ISW says Russian sources claim that the goal of Russian offensive operations in the Kupyansk direction is to draw Ukrainian forces from other sectors of the front to the Kupyansk area, and suggested that the wider operational goal is to distract Ukrainian troops as opposed to gaining substantial territory, which is exactly what I said over the last week. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar has reported that Russian forces have suffered heavy losses in the Kupyansk direction over the last week. I don't know how seriously you can take that. They probably have suffered heavy losses, but the question is, have the Ukrainians suffered heavy losses themselves? Then we come further down the front line here. So some successes for the Russians there in that arc, getting a fair bit of territory. We come down to Novoselivska here, which is to the west of Kuzumivka, slightly uphill, and there's a railway line and a road there. It appears that the Ukrainians have been pushed broadly out of Novoselivska. The Russians have got a strong foothold, I think, in that village. Whether they control the whole of it, there is some evidence to suggest possibly not. A Null report said this morning that Russian channels showing their forces using incendiary munitions on Novoselivska in the Luhansk region. Reportedly this morning, it refutes the claim of the Russian Ministry of Defense that the settlement is fully under their control. Apparently, it is still being fought over. I don't know how much that is true, whether that's definitely timestampable and geographically on Novosibirsk, or whether it's just near it. But the claim is that the Ukrainians are no longer in Novosibirsk, that the Russians are controlling it. We'll see how that turns out. As we come further to the south, Ukrainians are having more success here around the Kherson, this 12-kilometer long uh, attack sector that the Russians uh, kind of, well, first of all, they attacked around Kherson, then further to the north and to the south a little bit by Novovodjany. They took some forested areas. And then they kind of ran out of steam. The Ukrainians got some reinforcements in and they pushed them back, and they are continuing to push them back. So they are having more success around there, I think, than the Russians. Deputy Defense Minister Halamalia reports that the situation in the Kupyansk sector, whether that's that northern one I was talking about, or this whole kind of area, where Russia has concentrated its main offensive efforts. According to her, Russia's goal is to reach Kupyansk. For several days now, the Russian army has been trying to advance to the city from the northeast and is advancing in Sinkivka. So actually, that is definitely in this northern area there. So they are trying to advance through Sinkivka. But of course, it could be that the Ukrainians are pushing back over there towards the Oskil River, as the other source was reporting. But anyway, to continue, Maliar says the situation is difficult but controlled. There is no advance by the Russian army. Whether that extends to, oops, sorry, there's my legend. Whether that extends to all this area, saying there's no advance, I don't know, or whether that's just in that Liman Pesci area. But yeah, the Russians are being pushed back in that Kherson area here. The armed forces of Ukraine made additional territorial gains towards Kovalivka, which is just north of Kherson. In fact, that's the area that this source, Astraya Intel, is saying. So that's towards sort of just to the south of Sahivka. If we go back to here, that is just in this area there, where there is possibly some advance for the Ukrainians. I think this line of Suryak maps, as I keep saying, is very good at showing Russian advances as soon as Russia has a hint of an advance. But as soon as they are pushed back, they are very slow to react. So you have a Russian defensive line here in this map that looks somewhat different from the defensive line shown here. And it could well be that the Ukrainians have had some success in this sort of area, pushing the Russians back towards Kovalivka, or just north of Kovalivka, northwest of Kovalivka. So that's the situation in Kupyansk. There is obviously lots of other things going on. The ISW says a Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces advanced towards Kherson, but Russian forces still control the heights near the settlement. So that's probably Kherson itself. Moving further to the south, there is still lots of activity around Kreminna, Terny, Torska, Zytlivka, all these kind of places, Yampolivka, but no changes of mapping. So just to remind you, that's Terny, Torska, Yampolivka, so on and so forth, and in the Serebryansky forest. No news about Bilohorivka or Spurna or anywhere like that. We come down to Bakhmut, and actually it's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, the whole front line is a mixed bag, to be perfectly honest. Now, I've been talking for a long time about how the Ukrainians have just kind of stalled in Rozdilivka. They made some really good advances quite quickly, and then kind of just stopped during their early stages of the counter attack around Bakhmut. And I was thinking this is a good place to attack. If you get the heights there, then you're looking down on Solidar, and you can start, really giving the Russians a bit of something to think about in this northern area. But they kind of stopped and haven't really done anything for sort of 2 weeks plus now, maybe longer than that. And today we hear just a little snippet that actually they could be under a bit of pressure, the Ukrainians themselves. So this is Global War Monitor saying Russia has advanced towards Rozdilivka, north of Solidar, and 1 square kilometre has been added to the occupied status. So that is quite surprising and a bit of a worry as far as I'm concerned. I think this would be a really good area for the Ukrainians to be concentrating on. But instead of seeing further advances. We've seen them lose some territory on the way to Rozdilivka. So it'd be interesting to know what's going on there and what the intentions of the Russians are there. I get a sense actually the Russians might be trying to push back all around Bakhmut as they have been, but maybe up in the ante a little bit. As we hear from Suryat maps that actually, and this is quite a substantial gain of land as well. So they were, as Andrew Perpetua indicates here with the blue line, yesterday or just this morning, the Ukrainians were supposedly knocking on the door of Kurdyamivka there and trying to sort of force the Russians back behind this railway line all the way up past Klishchivka and then into Bakhmut. Well, as you can see, that's really substantial gains, as according to Suryat maps, who say situation south of Bakhmut, the Russian army launched a counterattack and forced the Ukrainian army to retreat from significant part of the western shore of the channel. So that's basically the western side of the canal, which relieved the pressure of over the town of Kurdyamivka. Meanwhile, the situation in Avdiivka and Klishchivka continue to be difficult for the Russian forces as Ukrainian reinforcements are arriving in the area. So Suryat map still has Klishchivka under control of the Russians, which I definitely disagree with, and then has this claim that I haven't seen anywhere else yet. So take it with a pinch of salt, but it could well be that the Russians have counterattacked there. We'll wait for further confirmation from any other sources to see if that's actually true. Surat Maps recently has been towing the Russian MOD party line very much with what they say, and sometimes they come out with outright nonsense that then Surat Maps has to kind of walk back, tail between the legs, and say, yeah, that wasn't right, but it takes them quite a long time to walk back the erroneous claims. Now, in Klishchivka, I just don't think, I was listening to Andrew Perpetua's live stream from last night, it's just, it seems impossible that the Russians have any kind of control over Klishchivka as it stands. From what I understand, the Russians are not in Klishchivka, but the Ukrainians are unable to kind of take it easily, or that they're unable to gain control of it because they're just getting hammered by artillery. It's only a couple of roads, and every time they move, they just get hit by Russian artillery. This is a sort of battle zone, if you like, where you need to keep advancing. As soon as you are stuck in a place, then you are just plumb targets for artillery. So you need to keep moving, keep that momentum going, force the Russians back and back, but they're so well dug in everywhere. In fact, there are trenches dug in. This was one of the early places before even the major ones down in the south. They were building trench lines down here. There was the original Surovikin line came up along this kind of annex border area and then sort of doglegged around here. So they do have trenches behind Bakhmut, and it will be difficult for the Ukrainians to make those advances. It's all about how well the Russians can man, and this is the same for the south, how well they can man those trenches. It's fine having the trenches, but if you've got no one to put in them, then there's your problem. Rebar pro-Russian source says in the Bakhmut sector, Russian forces have managed to stabilize the situation north of the city. At the moment, Russian artillery and aviation are actively working on the enemy positions. On the southern flank, the Ukrainians have once again stepped up fighting and are conducting an offensive at the Avdiivka-Klishchivka line. At the moment, the enemy's attacks are being held back by the Russian units. So that doesn't quite talk to anything that Suryat Maps is saying, which is more recent than the rebar. Would be the kind of summary of yesterday's activity for Rebar, whereas Suryat Maps, this is just kind of coming out for them this afternoon. So yeah, there is that claim out there. Going back to a claim that's slightly earlier than that, Andy Schneider here. Bakhmut in brief, minor advances by the Ukrainians near Bakhivka. The Ukrainian army attacks Russian positions east of Klishchivka. Some could be taken. Northeast of Kurdyamivka, the Ukrainians were able to advance a little. So that goes completely against what Suryat Maps has said, but Suryat Maps is a more recent one. Special forces of the Ukrainians are very active in the entire southern section. He said that the day before. So there could be some successes for Bakhivka, for the Ukrainians up there in Bakhivka, and some success for them in this line as well, but also taking into account what Suryat Maps has said, and the Russians could well be countering there. And that goes to what I was saying, that they are trying hard to counter in so many places, and exactly what I said yesterday, that could come back to haunt them as they find that they culminate and exhaust themselves in defense. and then leave themselves empty behind, and Ukrainians can just puncture through. So there is a risky move that for the Russians. Then we come down to Avdiivka. We go on to the ISW that says in Avdiivka. Oh, actually, no. This is what I want to say about Bakhmut from the ISW. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces counterattacked near Klishchiivka and pushed the Ukrainian forces out of several unspecified positions. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Klishchiivka is fully under Russian control. So again, that fits in line with what Syriac Maps has been saying. Maybe I didn't check. That could even be Syriac Maps that they're referring to. But I don't see that from the evidence. And Andrew Perpetua, I trust very much. He is poring over the shelling evidence and the video evidence, and he's like, no, that's not what is happening. So I'd go with him, but it might be an incorrect claim. Then in Avdiivka, all the usual places, Mariinka and places around Avdiivka, but geolocated footage posted on August the 7th shows that Russian forces have made limited advances near Krasnohorivka. And this is a geolocated footage, which is a Telegram video that has the Ukrainians hitting, from what I can work out, a BMP-2 near the city of Donetsk. So this would be in the Avdiivka area. This, apparently, according to the ISW, shows the Russians in a position that is a slight advance. And yeah, that is in line with the idea from Syriac Maps that they had advanced up this railway line here. I think it's a railway line, it might not be, towards Krasnohorivka. So yeah, that would confirm Syriac Maps' claim there. Andrew Perpetua might not have looked at that to react to that with his own mapping there. He's somewhat more shell orientated, not completely actually. He does look at all. In fact, he keeps a database of the videos of all the losses, so he's very much about geolocating those videos too. So that's probably a bit unfair of me. And then it seems that there's some Russian gains according to Andrew Perpetua. This coloring is correct. So some Russian gains, a little salient there possibly, and some more gains around here. I don't know if that's the no, is that the fortress area? No, I think that's further to the north, the Kupyansk area that I think was here. Yes, that's that area there. So that's what the Russians took, and then the Ukrainians took it back. But actually, Syriac Maps and Andrew Perpetua disagree on that. Well, it looks like the Russians are pushing down from the north there and are pushing over here from the east. So some gains for the Russians in this area, right up and down here, even coming down towards Solodka, where the Ukrainians have had some joy recently. So that's something to look out for. I haven't seen that sort of mentioned in any other sources, but Andrew Perpetua, with his mapping of, as I say, both videos and shelling, has concluded that they made some gains there. There's activity in Mikilska again. So we go down to the ISW here. The Russian MOD claimed that the Ukrainian forces were repelled in Mikilska by the Russians. So that is, activity there where we have seen the Russians push back to the outer limits of Mikilska settlement, back from the dachas and these fields northwest of Mikilska on the way to Vuhledar. Right. Then we come further to the west, and we have some Ukrainian gains in the Staromorsky Uruzhaini area, as according to Andrew Perpetua. And we have heard that the Ukrainians have got a foothold in that northern area of Uruzhaini, and this will be somewhere that Andrew Perpetua would have been poring over. In fact, he's reflected this in his mapping. That's a light blue one. The dark blue Ukrainian gains refer to Syriac Maps admitting that there's some pushing there and that they've lost some ground, the Russians. Don't know if actually Syriac Maps showed that as one of their kind of pictures that they often do on Twitter, or whether that was one of their quiet ones that they are like, oh yeah, change the map in there, but don't shout about it like they do with Russian successes. So let's look at a few sources around here, referring to this area. Deep State confirmed that the frontline changes north of Uruzhaini according to their map, the northern half of the village is now a grey area. So if we go back to my map, that's that northern half there now being a grey area. I think most everyone agrees that that's the case. It's just how far the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back is what's up for debate. And Ukrainian forces have officially entered the northern part of Uruzhany, according to Global War Monitor as well, saying that. So Euromaidan Press puts a number on it. Ukraine advanced about 1 kilometer in the vicinity of Uruzhany in the southern front line, as well as towards 2 more settlements. At the same time, Russian forces maintain pressure in Luhansk Oblast, so that's what we talked about earlier, right up to north, where some positions change hands several times a day. So Staromyorsky is, or Uruzhany, I should say, is under a lot of pressure from the Ukrainians, and they are fighting over that. No doubt fighting elsewhere in the area too. Rebar, the pro-Russian source, says in the Vremivka sector, so that's Avdiivka Novosilka sector, Ukrainian units are attacking from the north and northeast, and they've managed to enter the outskirts of Uruzhany. Later, as a result of the Russian counterattack, the enemy was forced out of the village and withdrew to their previous positions. So that is to say that the Ukrainians aren't in Uruzhany, according to Rebar. They've been pushed back out. Whether that still accepts that as a grey zone, or whether they've been pushed out and it's now fully back in the control of the Russians, I don't know. But I would be siding with the claim that the Russians are certainly struggling to hold Uruzhany. And then if we go to the ISW, just see if there's anything that's particularly important here. Yep, several Russian sources, including the Vostok Battalion, so that's Khodorkovsky, have claimed that Ukrainian forces have crossed the Mokry-Yaly River and unsuccessfully attacked the northern outskirts of Uruzhany. So this is to admit that the attacks are coming from the west, where they're crossing that river into Uruzhany, and from the north, where they're pushing the Russian forces back to the south, and also from the kind of northeast as well, in eastern direction, pushing in from the fields there. So Uruzhany it's going to be really difficult for the Russians to hold on to that. Right, as we come further to the west, we come to Robotna here, and we have some Ukrainian gains, as according to Syriac maps again, showing that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians further towards Verbove, which is fairly surprising for Syriac maps to admit that. But a few claims about Robotna. The Russians well, let's go back to the beginning. Sorry. Now there are battles for breaking through the first line of defense of the invaders in the south. The deputy commander of the Tavria Operational Strategic Group of Forces says that the Ukrainian fighters have moved forward in the Berdyansk direction. Well, that's Velika Novosilka, to be honest, as well as in the Robotna area. So this is a claim that there are advances in Robotna too, or around there. Russians actively use elite reserves from the second line of defense, paratroopers, marines, and special forces. The Ukrainian offensive is slowed down by large numbers of minefields as well as a lack of aviation. And I talked to you at depth about that this morning, about how if they are using elite troops to man the trenches in the area, even if it is second line of defense, that shows that they just don't have the reserves to defend here as robustly as maybe some might be led to believe. Alexander Pershin, an infantryman, said that the fields east of Robotna, the ability of cluster munitions to wipe out the tree cover was invaluable during a recent assault on a Russian position. He said there was no tree left above waist height, which is very, very sad, environmentally speaking. But this war is destroying landscapes. There are trees to the east of Robotna that have been taken out, and then that, means that the Russians defending there don't have that as cover, both from drones, artillery, first-person view drones attacking them, but also, spotting for artillery and whatnot. So that is what's happening in Robotna. I don't know too much about what is going on in the Kamyansk area and Pyatichatki, Sherebienki. Seems to be much of a muchness every day there at the moment. Just dropping into the ISW actually regarding Robotna, some interesting things said here. A Kremlin-affiliated mill blogger claimed that Russian forces repelled a Ukrainian infantry attack along the Robotna-Verbova line. Several Russian mill bloggers claimed the Ukrainian forces with armored vehicles and tank support unsuccessfully attacked Russian positions on the northern outskirts of Robotna on the morning of August the 8th. That's yesterday morning. Obviously, there's been 2 days of fighting since then. The Kremlin-affiliated mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces managed to occupy the northern outskirts of the settlement in the morning, but that Russian forces pushed Ukrainian forces out of those positions later in the day. That, to me, is really significant. I'm going to just pop back to Robotna because actually, I mentioned it briefly yesterday that there was a claim that there was fighting on the outskirts, and I thought that was significant. I was under the impression the Ukrainians would flank it, but they might be, trying to flank it and also go through it, a bit of everything, to do what they're doing in Uruzhani, be able to take it from three sides. So that is, I think, something of an improvement in the situation for the Ukrainians if they are fighting sort of within Robotna. So that is the ISW. And then I don't know if it says too much about what is going on to the west. Reportedly defending in the area claim that the situation is stable and calm near Piatikhatki and Zerebianki. So it seems to have calmed down a little bit there, and nothing to be heard about Kamyanska. Right. So we'll come away from this area of the front line, from the Zaporizhzhia front line, and we're going to go to Kherson, where it's all happening around here. We have some changes to the Russian lines here, as according to Suryat maps, some minor rejigging, not announced by Suryat maps, but certainly changed around there, which is not surprising. Yeah, and we have, it seems, again, we have this area of control of the Russians going into the Dachas by Antonivsky Bridge. I'm just not sure if that's still the case, but if Andrew Perpetua thinks it is, then I'll go with him. But there have been claims that the Russians have been pushed back to Oleshki by people like Null Reports. Now, what I've said to you this morning was that there's possibly a foothold for the Ukrainians at Holopristan. There's definitely a foothold at the Antonivsky Bridge and all the way back here. So the Ukrainians control all of this area here, robustly control this. So they've got this foothold right to past the Antonivsky Bridge, this kind of area, and then all of this, and then some of this area, the other side of the Konka River. So this is the Konka River, and they have control over some of this area too. So that gives them the ability to get troops across here, particularly. It's slightly more difficult when it comes to mechanized equipment, not only getting it across, but then once it's across, what you do with it. There isn't too many areas that you can drive easily here, and there are rivers that you have to get over. But there are claims that the Ukrainians are moving eastwards from this area along the sort of Konka River, this island to the south of the Konka River and towards Oleshki, and that they have been heavily shelling Oleshki in the south. So you have that. So that's the second area. And then all this talk about Kozachi Laheri that I discussed this morning. So one of the first things that we found out was that there was this Major Tomov. There were claims from Tomov about doing things against the Ukrainians, taking Ukrainian captives, but then no one was hearing from him from the Russians. So it turns out that was actually old footage, and that the latest was that Tomov's group himself were themselves ambushed, and the survivors were all POWs. A total of 25 soldiers were either killed or captured, including 3 officers. Ukrainians have captured weapons, radio stations, phones, ammo, and other valuable information during the attack. So there's quite a bit of footage to show. There are pictures of the stuff that they've captured. And then this footage of the burning BTR from the area also appears to show that that the Ukrainians have made those successes, and that was possibly the vehicle of that group you've just heard from. So when we go to this chap Dan, he talks about what has taken place. I've already gone through this with you, but up to maybe here it says sort of maybe up to 50 men. There's been talks of maybe up to 80 men have crossed the river and attacked in that area. There's some geolocation there. There's also footage, and this is more recent, so 3 hours ago, footage of the area being hit by a Ukrainian barrage from a reported Czech RM-70 Vampires multiple launch rocket system, and it hits the northwestern outskirts of Kozachi Laheri. The large block is there, viewed from the west. Film was sent yesterday, but I could only share it after a delay. In other words, this happened yesterday. There were then claims that came out that the Ukrainians had taken this. I don't know whether they have liberated that. It seems a bit too large to have liberated in a day. But there has been fighting here for several days, but there's been operational security. So actually, the information is only just coming out. So it could be that that is under the control of the Ukrainians. And then there's lots of geolocations to support this. Southern edge of the village. So they only visit the southern edge of the village. As mentioned, the Ukrainians have not yet claimed control of this area, but rather an area to its west. So this is, to go back to my map, possibly this area to the west that they claim to be in control of. Now, Andrew Perpetua talked about how there are many areas, fields around here that are getting hit by artillery. That could be the Ukrainian multiple launch rocket systems. It could well be the Russian artillery, which would suggest that the Ukrainians are in that area. So there is still a good deal of confusion about what is going on. Max23 says Ukrainian fighters landed on the left bank of Dnipro River, causing panic among the occupiers near the village of Kozachi Lahiri. There was a landing of our fighters together with special forces of the GUI, who expelled the Russian 1322 battalions from their positions. This made it possible to create a stronghold on the left bank. Our fighters bypassed Kozachi Lahiri from the south and continued their offensive in the direction of Chelberda village. Further movement creates conditions for encircling the units located there. And there, so just to let you know, the village to the south here is Chelberda, just here. If the Ukrainians got that far, then they really have made some pretty solid advances there. There are claims that there are only mobilized troops that have recently been rotated here, and that could be why the Ukrainians have found it somewhat easy to take some of this area. So Kozachi Lahiri, or Cossack camp in English, where about 80 Ukrainians assaulted successfully. The Russian unit that had just been rotated. Per reports, Ukrainians occupy the west side firmly. There are now reports that Ukrainians are moving more inland, presumably to encircle the Russians. As a reminder, southwest Ukrainians have already a foothold near Olishki and at the Antonivsky Bridge. Too early to have a precise area of what's going on. Sporadic reports that the Ukrainians have moved past the southern part of Kozachi Lahiri and are beginning to envelop Chelberda, with the potential of encirclement of the Russians defending the village. And then talks about tactically what's going on. This occurs near the old bridge site, where the Russians have been unable to dislodge a couple of hundred Ukrainian soldiers for weeks. Russian dilemma: do they move forces to crush this, or keep their units that are engaged further east and north? The best tactics force the enemy to make difficult choices, all of which have bad consequences. And this is what I talked about earlier in my morning news video, that it presents a dilemma. Both options are bad. So you pull troops from up in the Zaporizhzhia front line to defend here, troops that you'd already pulled away from here to help defend in Zaporizhzhia. And if you do that, then you plug the gap here. And as I said before, it's like whack-a-mole, and then the mole pops up here. So the Russians then become weaker in this area, and the Ukrainians can penetrate more effectively. So then you pull people from Kherson back to there to defend, and it's like this. Like I've said previously, it's like a blanket that's covering this whole area that is too small for the whole area, and you pull the blanket, to cover one area of the bed, and another area of the bed is suddenly open. So you pull it back there, and it leaves another area open, and so on and so forth. They just don't have enough to defend all the places they need to defend, which is interesting. So instead of sending troops there from, say, Luhansk, right, what they're doing is then attacking in Luhansk. One might think to try and divert Ukrainians from around here up to Luhansk. But the thing is, the Ukrainians have loads in reserve to be able to send others to Luhansk or Kharkiv, actually, in that particular area. But you get what I'm trying to say here is that the Ukrainians can successfully defend these areas without really dipping too much into their counteroffensive capability or their capacity. And so yeah, I don't know whether it's wise that the Russians are concentrating on some of these areas rather than shoring up their defenses along the Dnipro and elsewhere as well. So anyway, that's what's happening in that area. I mentioned Trent Tilenko talking about this, talking about logistics being a real issue for the Russians in the whole area, but also that the move of the Russian VDV, so the airborne units from Kherson to, so that it's a 7th um, airborne division, I think, mobile airborne division that's been moved from Kherson to Zaporizhzhia, while the Ukrainians have a light infantry bridgehead, is an utterly dangerous move that is merited only by the imminent collapse of the Zaporizhzhia front caused by a Russian logistical lack of mind. So he's trying to join everything together to say that actually the logistics here are so bad, they're possibly resorting to using barge traffic to send stuff into Berdyansk and Mariupol and then get the trucks out and send it to the front line, rather than bring it along by rail or trucks all the way through Crimea, because the Ukrainians have hit the bridges in Henichesk, in Chonhar and in Kerch. So they may have to be resort to this, but can they get enough mines? They're really heavy. You need quite a lot of fuel to get them places, but you also need fuel to transport fuel itself, and you'd rather do that by rail, but you can't do it by rail because the rail's been screwed, and so they're doing everything by truck. And does this mean that they are unable to lay mines as much as they can to replace the mines that have been used up or cleared, or to throw mines into the advancing Ukrainians where they've broken through certain minefields? Are the Russians in trouble? And if they're moving some of their airborne units from Kherson to Zaporizhzhia, does that also show them to be in trouble? But at the same time, the Russians are causing the Ukrainians something to think about in areas, possibly a counterattack in Bakhmut, possibly south of Avdiivka, and up here in Kharkiv and Luhansk. So it's a real mixed bag today, as far as I can work out. Let me know what you think. Anyway, take care. A big love to you all. Thanks so much for your support. I'm off to go and fill my belly. I think it's been a long time coming. So take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.